Hello, everyone, and welcome to the live broadcast of How to Publish a Book. I can't remember what I named it. I'm Nicohle Christopherson, and we have with us tonight Chris Votey, my writing mentor and an amazing friend, who has agreed to do this video series with me in order to show the public how editing works, for lack of a better term. You can see Chris's website at, oh, crud. What was it? I forgot. And I closed it out. Chris, do you remember what your website is? Because I do not.
Well, if I don't, then I would be a really bad blogger. You can find my website at writing.chrisvotey.com. I'm sure Nicohle will post it down below.
Absolutely, I already have. And his Twitter is at author Votey. So go and blow him up and have fun with that. He is awesome.
Please don't blow me up. I like staying in one piece.
All right. So to explain basically what we're doing tonight, I have written a short story called Ring of Roses, and Chris is helping me get it publishing ready so that I can get it out there and finally be a published author. So what we're doing tonight is we're going to go over the first couple of paragraphs, and then we're going to continue the series from there. Go ahead and take it away, Chris.
Well, I want to kind of go into a little bit more explanation of what it is that we're trying to do, but I want to start off a little bit about myself, and that's kind of why we're starting this impromptu. We stated online that we'd be doing it tomorrow, and sorry, your video's giving me vertigo.
I'm sorry. If I knew how to turn it off, I absolutely would.
All right, let me just look away.
Okay.
All right, so about me. Sorry, I keep saying I'm trying to break that habit.
Oh, so I know that feeling.
Me, I am a published writer. I am an indie writer. A lot of people don't really consider that to be actual writing, because if your book is not in a bookstore somewhere, then you haven't really made it. But I completely disagree with that. The act of finishing a story and having the courage to put it out there for the world to see, that is what makes you a writer. And anyone who feels that they must go through the traditional route, I would argue that that's no longer required, and you can go through the indie route. And that's what we're going to be doing today. As I've mentioned, I have published 5 books. 4 of them are fiction. 1 of them is a writing help book. Now, I haven't quite made it as a writer just yet, not as an author. One of my books has had like 10 reviews on it, and all of them were very favorable. And that has been my biggest success so far. And I'm waiting to take my writing to the next level, but it's a game of commitment. The longer you commit to it, the more likely you'll be discovered. It's too easy for people to get in and like, oh yeah, I'm going to be the next J.K. Rowling. I'm going to be the next Stephanie Myers. I can't think of anyone else. Stephen King. You know, you just write one hit and you're big. The problem with that is they are the exception. Most writers out there, they're not known for their first few. In fact, J.K. Rowling wasn't known for her first Harry Potter novel. It wasn't until her 3rd one did she finally get attention from the world, and then she became famous. So to be successful in this, it's very, very difficult. You might spend the next 10 years of your life doing this and not actually make it. But I, despite that, I'm still trying because I firmly believe that I do have something to offer this world. It's like anything in life, you're taking the risk on whether or not you will actually make it. Now, I've been mentoring Nicohle for about 4 years now. We actually met on Twitter, although I forget under what circumstances.
And if I remember correctly, you started some kind of world building thread, and I posted on it, and then we just kind of hit it off from there.
Okay. So I love to mentor people. I love to help other writers out. And in fact, every year for NaNoWriMo, except for last year, I like to see if anyone needs a mentor like me. Now, most people just want a mentor for Nano, and I'm happy to help with that. I have done Nano twice, and in both times I was very successful. But I also try to offer advice on how to take yourself from Nano to eventually becoming a writer. And right now in my career, that is something that I can offer as a mentor, is how to get to the level that I'm at. How to get beyond that, I'm still trying to figure that out. But I have found that most people out there that are trying to be writers are trying to get to the level that I'm at. Now, something I want to address before we get into the actual editing is 1 year during NaNoWriMo, I spoke to someone. I spoke to a potential protege, and they said to me, "Oh, Nicohle, mute your microphone when you're not using it."
Oh yeah, okay. Give me just a second.
You can use Control D. It's a quick shorthand. Sorry for that. Where was I? So I messaged someone and I told them that one of the biggest challenges when it comes to writing, well, when it comes to mentoring people, is that not everyone is really ready to hear that their work is not fantastic. And you might be listening to this now. It's like, well, of course, you have to start from somewhere, right? And you would think that's the case, but a lot of writers out there, when they get started, they give their work to family and friends, and every one of them tells them, oh, this is so great, this is so great. So when I come around, I'm like, well, no, this actually requires a lot of work. People can get very resistant to me. People get very hostile towards me. Like I've just insulted them to such a great degree. Nicohle actually had difficulty with this at first when I was telling her some of the problem areas that she had. And she was like, well, you just don't understand. This is what I'm trying to do. And through patience and just trying different approaches, she began to understand where I was taking her. And, you know, I've done this myself. When I was first started out writing and people were critiquing me, I was like, no, 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 you just don't understand. This is what I'm trying to do. And I had to take a step back and realize, oh, no, wait. If someone is saying this, then other people might say this and might give me a 1-star review. So, but the person in question asked me, what right do I have to say anything at all? What right do I have to tell a person what is good and what is bad, or that their work is not good enough? And the answer is none. I have no right at all. I mean, who am I? I'm just some indie author who hasn't quite made it yet, who hasn't made a living at this. I'm a nobody. So why should anyone listen to me? Well, I'll tell you why. Because it's my opinion. And they can choose to take my opinion and they can choose not to. One thing I've always told Nicohle during our time as me teaching her is take what I give you, give it some serious thought, and then decide if it's something that you want to incorporate as to you as being a writer or if it's not applicable to you. I will never require her to ever do something the way I want her to do it. It's up to her what she chooses to do with the information I give her. And the same thing goes with editing. If I say, hey, this sentence right here makes absolutely no sense, I think you should remove it, she can say, no, I think it needs to stay there. Done. Finale. I don't need to be bothered anymore. She made a decision based on my advice. And I say this because I have met other people out there who've tried to give me advice on what they should do, and I disagree with them. And then they get angry with me, like, no, you asked me for my advice, so you must follow it now. And if you don't, then, you're just a horrible person. And it's like, no, that's a horrible way to do it. So, what we're doing here tonight, I'm going to help her elevate her book. We're going to try to get her first book published. Now, when I first started out writing, or when I first started my path to becoming an author, I had some throwaway story that I made into a book. It's called Scraping By. In fact, the entire story is 12 pages long. I did it for two reasons. One, I did it because I wanted to know how the system worked, how to take your book, give it to an editor. I did get a professional editing done with it, even though it's so short, and then publish it on Amazon, get it on Kindle. I wanted to see how the whole process worked. But the second reason I did it, and the reason why I'm here with Nicohle tonight, is once I knew that if I could just get one thing out there, then the pressure would be off of me to try to get my own book out there. That until I did that, I would always be psyching myself out. And in recent months, in talking to Nicohle, I mean, she's always had this difficulty, but I think it's gotten worse. That she's been psyching herself out. That she wants so badly to get a book out there with her name on it. But she wants it to be as good as possible. And don't get me wrong, that's a very good thing. But then she starts to question herself as, well, maybe this isn't good enough. Maybe this is not something that can be published. And when she starts doing that, it starts affecting her work. So I said to her, here's what you're going to do. You're going to write a story, a short story, and we're going to get it published. We're going to put it on the Amazon market. And if she has one thing on there with her name, an actual book out there, then she's not going to have that pressure anymore of getting her book out there. She already has something out there. She already knows what it's like to have her name out there. So she's not going to psych herself out. So when she does her next story, that pressure is gone. And the same thing happened to me, because the story I told you that I did the best on, that I've gotten several reviews, was my second book, which was Terran's Psychosis. I did not feel the pressure of having to get my book on the market because I already knew what was involved with that. So that's what this session is about, is helping Nicohle get her first work on there. And maybe it's not an example of her best work, as Scraping By is not an example of my best work, but it does get her out there. It is a starting point. No one says that your first step has to be absolute perfection. And in fact, it's better that it's not. that if your first step is mediocre, you have something to work from there. You have another step to take towards getting to the end point of your career. But if you start with absolute perfection, you have nowhere to go from there. You don't get to grow as a writer. So, you have any response to anything that I just said in that rant?
A few. One, isn't he so humble? I mean, seriously, you got 5 books out there and you're still saying you're not making it. Goodness gracious. And second off, you know me so well as far as our relationship as mentor and mentee goes, mentor and protege. I'm not sure how that works. Anyway, the point is, you are absolutely right. I have been psyching myself out for years about this publishing thing, and I'm just ready for it to be done and over with. And so I really appreciate you letting me take a cue from your career to do this short story publishing nightmare that we're going to go through here in a little bit. And I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you so much for going through this with me, because I know that I can be a little stubborn sometimes. And I also know that my work is not necessarily always the best. And I know that you have a lot of other projects that are going on too. So I wanted to say thank you as well, um, in front of the entire audience so that they can thank you too. Because this is definitely not the norm for most mentor relationships, and I appreciate you going above and beyond. That's pretty
First
much
off,
all I wanted
you're
to say.
stubborn, so that makes you like every other writer in the world, including me.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And I actually am quite sad that this is not the standard mentorship relationship with a protege. A good mentor does everything they can to help their protege. I do like to think that I go above and beyond, but if you have a mentor out there that's not really helping you out, then find another mentor, in all honesty.
Find
It's not
you,
for me to
because you're
say
an
that,
awesome
but
mentor.
all right. So another thing I do want to say, because it might seem like I'm going to be tough on Nicohle and I'm going to be nitpicking every tiny little thing, which is absolutely necessary. And this is actually another difficulty that Nicohle had last year is, yeah, I'd start going through and start editing some of her work, and she'd see how many things that I would mark up, and she's like, "Oh, I can't be a writer. I can't even get this right, and you have to do it for me," and blah 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 blah. And then I showed her something someone edited for me, and it looked just as bad as when I do edits for her. So, I mean, us writers, we make our own worst editors. That's why we need other people. So, when someone edits my work, I'm like, oh, duh, I should have seen that. Or, huh, I didn't think about that. So, yes, I'm going to be hard on Nicohle. Yes, I'm going to get her for a lot of things, but it's necessary. And it's
And
also a very good thing. Go ahead.
it's also something I ask for. I absolutely want you to be as critical and harsh as you need to be, because I want this manuscript to be perfect, or as close to perfection as you can get, considering we're human.
Or that a story is never truly done, even when you finally decide to publish it. All right, so before we get started, because I've already kind of started doing a little bit of editing already, Nicohle, I want you to read the first 2 paragraphs of your story, and then I can show you how I've edited those first 2 paragraphs.
Okay, sounds good to me. So here are the first 2 paragraphs of the first draft of Ring of Roses. Sometimes I think it might be too dry to snow. There's only a terrible dry coldness left in the world now. The sky is cloudy more days than not. It feels like those old BBC shows that were set in England. Drizzly gray clouds. Nothing ever falls from the sky anymore. After everything fell apart, after people started dying and the world grew too big for those in it, it was difficult to imagine snow anymore, especially when it's cold. I wore a scarf around my neck and nose and mouth at all times, not because the shrieking winds stung my skin, but because the dust might get in my mouth. All right,
So,
and sorry, go ahead.
so right away, my criticism of what you've written is it feels very disjointed. You have good sentences, but they don't seem to flow with each other. It really feels like you have a laundry list of things you want to say, and you're trying to put it all into two paragraphs at once. And because it doesn't flow, readers are going to have difficulty trying to get into it. And these being your first two paragraphs, they need to really flow very well. So you can draw people in to get them to the next paragraph, to get them to the next page. So how you write these first two are going to be absolutely important. So let me go ahead and show you what I have done, and we'll discuss this in more detail. All right, can you see that?
Yes, I can see it perfectly.
All
Let
right, so as
me.
you can see, the red marks obviously things I want her to take away, and the blue marks are things that I've added to this. So let's start with her first sentence. Sometimes I think it might be too dry to snow. I basically rewrote that as I miss the days of old when it snowed. It kind of gives more of a nostalgia feeling. Now,
That
what she's
definitely.
saying here is important, but I think that this can be stated in another way later. That she's basically saying it's very dry outside and it hasn't snowed in a while. But let's, start with nostalgia first. Let's say I miss the days of old when it snowed, which gives us an indication that whatever area this character's in, it once snowed, but it no longer does. Also kind of leaves a bit of a mystery of, well, wait, is it because, something happened in this area or to the world, basically? Our next sentence, there's only a terrible dry coldness left in the world. I replaced that with, now the world is left with a dry, terrible cold. It kind of plays off with the first sentence, nostalgia, and then describing what's currently going on. I basically tried to use the words that she used, but kind of reorganize it so it flows a lot better. Now I'm going to reread this paragraph once we get to the end of it. The sky is cloudy more days than not. Good sentence. It feels like those old BBC shows that were set in England. You mean there are old BBC shows that were not set in England?
Good point. Okay.
This one, it feels a very dated reference, and that not everyone will fully understand this, but plus, I don't think it's really necessary. I see what you're trying to do. You're trying to give a comparison that people should be able to understand, but not everyone's necessarily going to understand that because, even when I was growing up, I didn't watch the BBC until I was 30 because I just never got that channel. And then even then, I wasn't really watching it for the British comedy. And nowadays, I watch Star Trek Voyager on there, American on BBC. It still confuses me. So I see what you're trying to do with it, but I don't think it adds anything to it. and that if we take it away, it ends up being better because it just makes it more succinct. All right. So I'm playing off the previous sentence. The sky is cloudy more days than not. Now, she initially said drizzly gray clouds, but I wanted to add to that, and not the white fluffy clouds, but the drizzly gray ones. It was, and then she also says nothing ever falls from the sky anymore. Anymore is a redundant word to use in this sentence because you've said nothing ever. Nothing ever and anymore. It's just really a redundant statement. So just remove the word anymore from that sentence and you're still saying exactly the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, although I do see that with your edits, you did use it as a precursor to nothing ever. Is that an obscure writing rule or just a personal preference?
Well, what this right here is more of a suggestion on the direction that you should take it. Ultimately, you're going to have to come back and rewrite it. I'm just putting in a few notes here. My edits are not going to be perfect. It's only going to be used as a tool to help you to become perfect because I'm not writing this for you. So,
Okay.
I know that kind of seems strange for anyone who's watching. It's like, well, you're the editor. It's your responsibility to make it perfect. That's not the job of the editor. The job of the editor is only to point out what is wrong with something. It's not our responsibility to rewrite it for the writer to make it perfect. That's ultimately up to the writers themselves. So I'm going to reread this statement, this paragraph here, based on what I've done so far. And yes, I know it's not perfect. I miss the days of old when it snowed. Now the world is left with a dry, terrible coldness. The sky is cloudy more days than not, and not the white fluffy clouds, but the drizzly gray ones. It was difficult to imagine snow anymore, as nothing ever falls from the sky.
I like it. It has more punch than my original paragraph. And to be honest, you're right. It was incredibly disjointed, and this way it flows a lot better.
Yeah, I'm building. Okay, so, and this is something that you've had difficulty with when you're writing. And for a first draft, it's not bad. But when you go into your later drafts, you when you write a paragraph, each sentence needs to build off of the other one. The first sentence I have, I miss the days of old when it snowed. But I build off of that saying that the world is left with a dry, terrible coldness. I talked about the way the world used to be. Now I'm talking about the way the world is now. And then I build off of that. The sky is cloudy more days than not. I'm talking about the weather, which leads me to the sky. And then I'm talking about the clouds. I say not the white fluffy ones, but the drizzly gray ones. And then by the end of the paragraph, and you don't necessarily have to do this by the end of the paragraph, you can do it by the middle and then have stuff that supports the main topic of it. But usually it's at the end. But I tie it all together by saying it's difficult to imagine snow anymore as nothing ever falls from the sky. So in a way, it's like drawing a path. You can go from the first sentence and draw yourself a path with every other sentence. Do you understand how I'm doing that?
Yes, it makes sense. It's one of those things where I'll have to practice it in order for it to become second nature. But
Right.
it makes more sense than the meandering that I was doing.
All right. So let's go with your second paragraph. The first part I pretty much cut out. After everything fell apart, after people started dying and the world grew too big for those in it, it was difficult to imagine snow anymore. What does one have to do with the other? What does it no longer snowing have to deal with the world dying or people dying? And I don't want you to answer that, but I want you to think about this. Because me as the reader, I'm reading this and I'm like, I'm starting to question it. So it's like, well, what does one have to do with the other? Is she talking about global warming? Was there, a nuclear bomb that went off? And it's not bad that you're making the reader ask that question, but it's bad that you're not giving an explanation as to how one is connected to the other. Because then you start going into the start of the story itself. So me as the reader, I'm like, what's going on here? Well, what's happened here? Why isn't she answering my question? And because you're not doing that, it takes away from immersion of the story. And it'd be one thing if you basically said, hey, after people started dying, the snow stopped falling because of nuclear fallout and blah, 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 or whatever the case is. I actually don't know. I haven't read this whole thing, and I've done that on purpose. Because you haven't given us an explanation, and it's probably best that you don't do it here at the beginning of the story, remove it. It's completely unnecessary for the absolute beginning.
Okay, that also makes sense. It's too easy for the reader to end up pulled out of the story and therefore want to just set it down and leave it.
Right, and we call that immersion. And when it comes to writing, immersion is probably the biggest thing that you need to be concerned with. You want the reader to keep going from the next paragraph to the next paragraph to the next paragraph. Even when they're like, oh, I need to stop, I have to go and water the gardens or whatever.
Or I
But
have
they just
work
want to
tomorrow,
keep
but one
reading.
more chapter.
Right, one more chapter, one more paragraph, one more page. That's what you want. That's the effect you want to create, because then people are going to be more likely to come back to it when they set it down. Especially when it's cold, also remove that, because we've kind of already established that in the above paragraph. Well, no, we haven't really established that it's cold outside. We just established that. But that's an indication that you're telling, not showing. And the next part can go into the showing of what's going on. I wore a scarf around my neck and nose and mouth at all times. I used it to cover my nose and mouth at all times. Because generally, when you have a scarf, you are wearing it around your neck, but it's usually only for your neck. But in this case, the individual is using a scarf to not only wear it around their neck, but in addition to around their nose and mouth. I did this not because the shrieking wind stung my skin, but because the dust might get in my mouth. Now, I would actually expand this section, use it to kind of describe the character a little bit more. I mean, you don't need to go into full details. I'm 6'2" and weigh 200 pounds, and I'm wearing a red shirt. Don't do that. But, we've already established this character is wearing a scarf. We can maybe comment a little bit more on maybe the equipment that the character is carrying. Maybe they're carrying a backpack, or maybe they have a hood, you know, things like that. And you could even say, like, oh, yeah, I don't know the gender of the character at this moment. I'm presuming it's a she, though. She's wearing a coat and she's zipped it up tight. And saying that indicates it's cold outside. Why else wear a coat? I mean, yes, the wind and all of that, but you can easily just wear a long shirt, a long sleeve shirt to protect yourself from the wind. But wearing a coat indicates it's cold, and that's an example of showing, not telling.
Okay. Which for our lovely watchers, I have a big problem with. I am a very much a shower, or rather a teller, and I'm trying to train myself into becoming a shower, and it's not working, which is part of why Chris is here.
There's a really bad joke here, but I'm not going to say it. I gotta be mature sometimes.
Sometimes, only sometimes.
Okay, so let's go to our next paragraph. Inside the old home and garden store was quiet. Grass grew up from the cracked linoleum. Trees had taken root underneath some of the holes in the ceiling. Plants seemed to struggle to take root in this new world. But once they did better than one might think. Okay, first, there's a big disconnect here. The previous paragraph indicates that our character is walking outside with a scarf wrapped around their head. And suddenly they're inside a garden store. This is a wasted opportunity here. You have a character who's outside, have them walk outside. Tell us about the world they see. Are they in a town? I mean, they're in a home and garden store, so obviously they're in some sort of civilized part of the world. Maybe it's a ruin with the way you're describing it, that no one visits it anymore, so maybe it's an abandoned town. Tell us that. And by tell, I mean show, like, they're coming across some houses that are abandoned. Are they in poor disarray? Are, how long has this character been on the road? Say, oh, I've been traveling for a week. Spend 1 to 2 paragraphs describing the world around us. This is the opportunity to do it. And I know you want to get right to the story, but you need to set up the setting. And the sooner you do that, the less that you need to do it later. That you can just do a little few tidbits here and there. But you need to make use of your 10 senses to describe the world around us. You don't need to use all 10, but use enough of them for us to get a feel for where we're at right now. You need to take us there. We need to feel that we're in this place. And this is the time to do it. You're starting with a character that's wearing a scarf around their head, and then they're inside.
I do agree with you. I think what you're the words. I can words. Anyway, I think that you're right as far as missed opportunities go. I didn't even think of using this moment to describe the world around her other than the home and garden store, because the home and garden store is the major setting, one of the major settings. And so I just wanted to get into that and start really building up that setting there. But I should have used that moment in between those 2 paragraphs to describe the rest of the world and what it was like to get into the home and garden store and all of that as well.
Now, with this first line right here, when I first read this, I'm like, inside the old home. Oh, they're inside a house. And garden store, it's like, oh, okay, it's a home and garden store. Unless the character sees a sign that says home and garden store, I don't think you need to say home and garden. You can just say garden store.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's probably not a bad idea for them to see a sign that says Rachel's Home and Garden Store as, you know, a good landmark within the story itself. And then the character can refer to it as a home and garden store, but by itself, you could just take out the word home and you just say old garden store, and it still work. Now, for anyone who's wondering, this process right here is called content editing. I'm sure many of you know that, but there are some people who don't really understand the different levels of editing. I'm only editing for content right now to try to make it better. The actual grammar and spelling and all of that comes later when she's had a chance to rewrite this for the content. It doesn't make sense to really edit the grammar, the punctuation, the spelling, and all of that now if we only have to do it again later. Okay, so the grass grew up from the cracked linoleum. That's very good right there. That shows us that this has been in disarray for a long time, or at least long enough for grass to grow and poke through the linoleum. So it gives us a sense of time, which uses our one of our senses of time. Trees had taken root underneath some of the holes in the ceiling. This confuses me. Are you saying that on the ceiling trees are growing?
No, it's supposed to be like there are holes in the ceiling, and then underneath those holes there are trees on the ground.
I would try rewriting this sentence because it just makes no sense to me. You could say that like the grass, the trees are growing up through the ceiling, but when you say taking root underneath some of the holes, it's just a little bit confusing. Now that you've explained it to me, I understand it, but
I
I
shouldn't
would
have
try
to.
rewriting that sentence so it's a lot more clear what you're trying to say.
Yeah. That way the poor reader doesn't get confused, because that is the one thing that we want to avoid ever, is a confused reader.
Right. And I'm sure other people out there who's reading it's like, oh no, I understood it perfectly. She doesn't need to change it. And the thing is that you can't predict how every reader is going to understand this. And that sometimes, and I hate to say this, that sometimes you have to write for the lowest common denominator. And that goes against every instinct for you as a writer. But if 1 out of 10 people would get confused by this, then you should consider rewriting it. Because 1 out of 10 people can give you a 1-star rating, and that can affect your sales. So you should take that into consideration when it comes to how you write things. You don't always have to do it. Sometimes you're like, well, you know, I can't always control that, and I really feel like this line needs to stay in here. And if you feel that strong about it, then no, don't change it. But if you feel like, well, you know what, I can kind of see how someone might be confused by that, yeah, okay, let's go ahead and change it. Would you
In
agree
this
with that, Nicohle?
Yeah, absolutely. In this case, I agree with you. It should be changed just to avoid general confusion. It's not as important a sentence as all that. It just needs to exist in order to explain a setting. It doesn't have to be this exact shape of sentence. Did that make sense? Because I feel like that didn't
Yeah.
make sense.
Yeah. I will give you props, though, that this is very poetic. And
Oh,
I
thank
think
you.
that this paragraph is a very poetic approach to describing, and it's a metaphor. It's a major metaphor for what the rest of the world looks like. Now, you're saying that, in those two paragraphs, you could describe what the world looks like. And I would actually frown upon doing that. I think you should just describe what this specific town looks like and make it an allegory for what the rest of the world looks like. But this right here, what you've written, kind of tells me what the rest of the world looks like, even though you haven't really, well, you have actually stated it and I crossed it out, but, the world is in shambles, and yet there is still new life trying to grow, trying to adapt to the changes of the world. And I think this one paragraph really accomplishes that, and I think it's very good.
Well, thank you very much.
Plants seem to struggle to take root in this new world. Yeah, taking out root from the previous sentence allows you to use it in this sentence. I mean, you want to avoid trying to use unique words a lot in a paragraph, especially from one sentence to the next. Sometimes you can't help it, but if you can avoid it, that's always better. So when you rewrite the trees have taken root, try to take root out of there so it stands out more in plants seem to struggle to take root. Plants seem to struggle to take root in this new world. But once they did better than one might think. Eh, yeah, that's pretty good. Doesn't really stand out, but I think it suffices for what needs to be. Not every sentence can be powerful. Sometimes you just need to get a sentence to say what you needed to say. The entirety of the store was left basically clean. This area was farther than I had ever come before, and the emptiness of it attested to the lack of refugees in this area. Too bad.
This
I've been looking forward to trading letters. It would have been nice to expand my impromptu mail service to a new area. Might have gotten us more supplies too. Well, the most
it
obvious
was
is that you
supposed to
meant
be
farther,
further.
not father.
Yep.
It happens. So if there's plants growing up through the ground, then how is this store left basically clean? And I think what you're saying is that this store, like products are still on the shelves, the aisleways are clear, there's not, you know, any general obstacles in the way to move around the store. But you just went from describing how plants are breaching through the floor and even some trees are going through the roof. And then you're saying, well, it's basically clean. And my first thought is like, no, it's not clean. There's trees all over the place.
You have a good point. And from what I was trying to explain is exactly what you were saying I was trying to explain. But I couldn't figure out a good visual way of doing it other than just saying that it was left basically clean. Um,
Well, and this is once again an opportunity to show, not tell, of I was able to move quite easily through the aisles, looking at every item, that nothing stood in my way as I went from one aisle to the next to the next.
okay.
The area was farther than I'd ever come before, and the emptiness attested to the lack of refugees in this area. This sentence would do better if it was in those 2 paragraphs that I mentioned about describing the world around you. It doesn't really fit here where we're talking about being inside this area. So it's a nice sentence, but it's not in the right place.
I think that's true of basically this entire paragraph in that case. I think that I if I were to do it again, I would move this paragraph up to um where you were saying we need to describe the town and probably expand on it a little more.
So I'm going to use the color green to actually, let's just highlight green. Yeah, highlight green saying expand this.
Okay.
But then the red that we need to remove it or move it to a new area. All right, I concentrated searching up and down the tumble down dusty shelves, trying to find what I came for. So I would remove pretty much all of this.
No.
Tried,
Don't.
I concentrated searching dusty shelves. Yeah, I'd remove that right there.
Aw.
I mean, you can keep it, but tumble down. What do you mean by tumble down?
They're tumbling down. They're not like fresh and clean and stuff. They're falling apart.
But the store is left basically clean. That doesn't make sense if
Good
it's
point.
basically clean and the store shelves are falling down.
You have a good point. Okay. It can go away.
Well, it can go away, or you can use the previous paragraph where we're describing the store to describe that the shelves look ready to break, or a few of them have broken, and some items are on the floor.
Okay. I think I can
Okay.
manage that in the rewrites.
I'm going to remove concentrated. Concentrated. I
Maybe
see what
focused
I
would
would
be a
use
better word.
here. What I would use here is started. It started searching dusty shelves trying to find what I came for. Because generally, if you're searching for something, you're already concentrating on something. So it's
Good
almost
point.
redundant to say that you concentrated searching. So I started searching dusty shelves trying to find what I came for. And certainly it's possible to haphazardly search for something, but given what you've kind of described of this world, I think readers would understand that the character is concentrating on their task. And you've kind of stated that there's no one in this town, this person has traveled a far way. So, yeah, I think it could just be removed.
That makes sense.
My fingertips touched the cold metal of the leftover debris as my nose tickled against the dust motes that drifted in the weak sunlight. That is wonderful, right there. These are the kind of sentences you need to have because you're using our senses, you're using touch, you're using temperature. 2 senses right there in one moment, touching the cold metal. And then nose tickled. There's another sense right there. or, well, no, it's not technically a new sense because we are referring to touch right now, but it deals directly with the nose. So the person wants to sneeze as there's dust flying in their nose. This is wonderful. You're taking me there. I know what cold metal feels like. I know when dust is hitting my nose and I want to sneeze. I'm right on the edge there. And this is just a prime example. This is why I have a lot of hope for you, because I know you can do it. You're just not in full practice of it. But this is a wonderful sentence.
Thank you. I'm beaming over here.
My goggles did nothing to stop the sting of a sneeze. And this is very poetic right here. Now you're saying the weak sunlight, yes, sometimes if you look at the sun, you can sneeze. And so you're also indicating, you're not beating us over with it like, oh, I'm wearing a scarf and goggles. I mean, you can do that, but now we identify that she's wearing goggles and she sneezed. You didn't write out and say, and then I sneezed. You're saying, did nothing to stop the sting of a sneeze. So it's a very poetic way of saying the character sneezed.
Kind of weird for someone who hates poetry that apparently my prose is very poetic.
Well, having a good understanding of how poetry works can make for a good novelist. I mean, you don't need to write incomplete poetry, but every now and then kind of have a poetic license to what you have. Try to describe things in an indirect way. Because when you do that, it can make it easier for the reader to be there. Readers don't want to read, and the character sneezed. Well, dust got in her nose and she sneezed. They want to read that, the nose tickled with the dust in the air, and even her goggles did not stop the sting of a sneeze. Because not only is it poetic, but it almost sounds a little bit on the epic side, It's not just beating you over the head with it, it's saying it in a different way. Sometimes you need to go simple, sometimes you need to go poetic. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense.
All right, so too loud. I probably scared all the birds away. Not that anyone would care. There wasn't anyone left here to care. I found the aisle that I was looking for and pulled the list out of my pocket. It was written on an old dirty paper pulled from one of our precious few notebooks and written on with a stick carefully ashed in the fire. It listed the seeds most likely to take root. My job was to find these seeds and make sure it made it back. That, and to see if there was any news of other refugees. Okay, so there's a lot in this sentence that we need to go in this paragraph that we need to go through. Okay. So here's another example of you telling, not showing. I mean, you're kind of doing it indirectly, but I think you could do this better. When like it didn't stop the sting of a sneeze or the sudden flapping of wings outside. And it's a very subtle way of saying that the sneeze was so loud that birds flew away. All you need to tell us is she started to hear the flapping of wings outside and we as readers can be like, oh, that's birds. You're inspiring us to use our imaginations to fill in the blanks.
Okay.
Now, ordinarily, I tell you to take notes, but since this is going to be on YouTube, you can watch this over
As
again.
many times as I need to.
Yeah. Not that anyone would care. There isn't anyone left here to care. This, because we're going to establish this in the 2 paragraphs from before, we don't really
Is
need to say it
redundant.
here that birds fly away. Most people don't care if birds fly away, even in a public setting. So,
True.
okay, so I found the aisle I was looking for and pulled the list out of my pocket. Decent, good. It was written on an old, so you would need the word "an," old. It was written on an old, dirty paper pulled from one of the precious few notebooks. That's good how you wrote that. One of the few one of our precious few notebooks. I like that because it kind of adds to the culture of the world as it is now. That they have notebooks, that they have paper, but it's such a rare commodity that, it's almost like it's protected in a vault somewhere. Like, oh, you need paper? Okay, well, we have so few left,
It,
make the most of this, it kind of gives that feeling, which is very good. Now, this one I've actually discussed with you in private.
yes.
And I showed you that there are ways that you can make ink from nature itself. That there are some trees out there that you can make into an ink, and that there's also a type of ink that you can make from soot or from smoke, and that's what they use in prison to make prison tattoos. So the idea that they're basically using an ash in a fire to write something, and then later describing that some of it is faded, you know, it just doesn't seem plausible to me. It doesn't seem plausible that this culture couldn't find an alternate form of writing, of being able to write something down.
And you're absolutely right. I wasn't really thinking very much when I created the post-apocalyptic culture. Um, and to be honest, I didn't put near enough thought into the world building. But you are absolutely right. People have been making inks for eons, basically, and they should still have the ability to.
Right. It listed the seeds most likely to take root. Good. My job was to find these seeds and make sure they made it back. This right here is rather redundant with what has been said so far. I would just remove it. My job was to find these seeds. It's more succinct. It gets to the point faster. You can remove the rest and you're still saying the exact same thing. In an indirect way, yes, but you're still saying the same thing. Is generally when you have a job to find something, it's generally to bring it back to whomever assigned
Gave
you
you the
this
job.
task. And this part here can also be removed and mentioned in those 2 paragraphs that we talked about, that they are also looking to see if there's news of other refugees out there. So this paragraph here should really just focus on looking through the aisle and finding seeds. Each package was bordered in green with what I assume was a picture of the plant it was harboring safely inside. That's wonderful. many people have gone to the home and garden store and found those packets of seeds, and yeah, they generally have a plant inside, but this being, an old world now, it's probably faded because that's what happens to papers. It eventually fades, especially with dust.
Yep.
So that's a very good way of writing that. It's kind of borderline that you're telling us, but you're also showing us at the same time. So it's a unique, a rare moment that you're actually doing both at the exact same time. It's not always possible to do that, but kudos on being able to do both in a single sentence.
Thank
You
you.
understand what I'm saying about that?
Yes.
The packets crinkled, some wrinkled with water damage when I brushed my fingertips against them. There was something else.
What just happened?
Okay, so this is so if the world is a very dry place, then why is there water damage? You
It's
said
a
nothing
case
falls
of,
from the sky, so how is there water damage?
you have a good point. It's another case of I didn't build the world well enough and didn't consider that.
I mean, I can understand if it's faded and it's very hard to read, and yeah, maybe there's water damage. Maybe, it rains on occasion or something, but, then someone might ask the question, well, if it had water splashed on it, why didn't the seeds start to grow? I would remove references to water damage and just say that, the package started to fade.
Okay. So the packets crinkled faded when I brushed my fingertips against them.
Right.
Okay.
Picking one up, I decided for the worn away writing with the letters S, P, N, and H. I could only assume it was spinach or some variety thereof.
And
Yeah,
then
just remove
that
this last.
last part, just remove it.
And I'm sure some of you out there are saying, well, you can't end a sentence. Yeah, thereof is one word. Can't end a sentence in a preposition. Yes, you can. Just don't do it very often. Some of the packets were sprouting little white tendrils. Um, why white tendrils? Is that a normal thing?
If you get a seed packet wet and it germinates, the seeds will grow inside the packet
Right.
and they come out as little itty bitty white roots.
Okay. But as we've established, we're going to probably take this part out, right?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. I picked these up with special care. Anything that could grow in the dark aisles of an abandoned home and garden store had to be worthwhile. It's a shame because that is a really good sentence right there. I love that sentence. That's beautiful right there. But, you've already established that there's no rain, so otherwise you'd have to explain how water was in this area.
Well, okay, so we're coming up on a problem then because there is a flooded aisle that acts almost like a river. And that's one of the major uh obstacles. That's the word I was looking for. Um that's one of the major obstacles in her way as far as hello, can you not be here right now, please? Ugh. in her way as far as getting to the other things she needs. And we can go over that when we get to it, but it is going to be an issue.
Which takes away from the idea that this store is basically clean.
Yes, it does. I'm starting to think that basically clean sentence is what needs to go.
That's one of the things that needs to go, yeah. Okay. I ran the back of a finger along the sprouting and sigh. Leaves rustled with my breath as I fought for a plan to carry this all the way back, and some kind of fertilizer too. I don't think it's so important that this character get fertilizer. I mean, they can get some, but a human settlement can make their own fertilizer.
Very true. It's just very difficult too.
Well, you saw the movie The Martian, right?
Yeah. And there were a lot of scientific inaccuracies with that movie.
True, but that's how human civilizations were able to make their own fertilizer. So given that this person's, and I would also imagine that maybe someone else out there is looking for fertilizer and not to just leave it on one person, because fertilizer is heavy. Or maybe this character is scouting out this area, picking up some seeds, then report back, oh yeah, there's fertilizer there. We need to go and get a wagon and take it there so we can go ahead and stock up on the fertilizer. It just seems very unreasonable to me that this person is both responsible for getting the seeds and those big bags of fertilizer, which would slow the person down on their walk back. Even if the walk back is 2 miles away, it would make them a lot slower.
That is true.
So probably that they're scouting out the area, but for right now, they desperately need to bring back the seeds, and then they can plan to come back to get other supplies.
Okay.
Where was a cart when you needed one? I decided to look for bungee cords while I was here too. That's fine. The cart area was easy to find, marked as it was written by a dirty and barely hanging sign. Finding a cart that worked, however, was a whole other animal. You can mention finding carts, but again, this is more of a scouting mission and not so much trying to bring everything back at once.
Yeah.
The first pulled to the left, I had always hated that. I'd always get the cart and pulled. Now, see, the other problem is you're talking about, I'm guessing, a shopping cart.
Yes.
And that only really works on a linoleum floor or concrete or asphalt. And given the disarray of this world, I'm guessing that they're not going to have asphalt all the way back to their home. And trying to drag that through dirt is not fun.
Well, okay, actually, and part of this is going to be explained in the first two paragraphs where everything needs to be described. Those paragraphs are turning out to be really crucial. Is that she actually has a bicycle with a little like trailer on the back, and she's just using the shopping cart to get the stuff from inside the home and garden store to the bicycle, and then she'll load it into the trailer in the back of the bicycle.
Okay. But so even then, it's still going to be difficult to have a trailer on a bicycle. I mean, a bicycle can be all-terrain, but can the trailer be all-terrain?
Some of them are made for sports and for camping, so they are, if she found the right kind, which it's my story and I say she did, it would be all-terrain. The stuff inside would get jumbled around.
Garden store, though?
Well, no. The shopping cart would not be all-terrain. at all. And
No,
you're
I'm
right.
talking about the trailer. You're telling me that she found a sports trailer in a home and garden store.
No, that was something she found a long time ago.
Okay. Alrighty, where are we? I'd always get the cart that pulled whenever Dad and I had gone to the store. It was like the world's worst superpower. That's funny. Hmm. What the cart Want the cart that pulls? Have Morgan get that for you. She's special. So this is a good point right here. And if you can still keep it in with the changes that we have, that's wonderful. And you can even still use this part right here where she wants to get some equipment together, put it in a cart, and then take it as far as she can before she has to put it into her bike. And it's probably not even a bad idea that maybe she takes some things with her, and maybe there's like a special tree somewhere, or maybe a special building where she can put supplies. And then when the town she goes to, when they come back, they can travel part of the way there to get what they need and not have to go all the way back to the store until they're more prepared for it.
That makes sense.
But I do like this part here where she's lamenting about carts and reminiscing about the world of old and being with her father. And it's just really funny, the worst superpower. And then her kind of like, hey, do you need a cart that pulls to the left? Call Morgan. She can help you with that. That's wonderful how you did that.
Thank you.
I pushed that one aside and checked the next. Squeaky, but seemed serviceable. Good. At least until I tugged on it and it gave a wretched groan and collapsed. Wonderful. Perfect. On second check, the wheels had been rusted clean off. I groaned quietly and went with the cart that pulled to the left. Ooh, I like this paragraph right here. You know, it's kind of almost a lesson here of, take what you can get, and that, just because there's another choice doesn't mean it's going to be a better choice. That sometimes that little thing that annoys you is worth putting up with. So I do like this.
Thank you. I rather enjoyed writing it. I honestly thought it was a little bit superfluous for being in such a short story, but then I wrote it and it was just so adorably hilarious that I just couldn't get rid of it.
Well, the thing, you do have a short story, and I've reformatted it to be about 18 pages, as I think you initially gave me about 16 pages, the way you format it. But
Yeah.
in all honesty, yeah, it's a short story, but don't be afraid to, add a page to it or even remove a page from it. Make it as long as it needs to. Don't be like, well, it has to be short, so I can't have this part or that part. Just, write the story that comes to you.
Okay.
So it was difficult to maneuver it around the crack and broken tile, but it was worth it. Passing the seed aisle, I continued on past the chandelier aisle in a home and garden store.
Yeah, have you never been to a Lowe's or a Home Depot?
Sure. Is that what you're describing as a Home Depot?
Yeah.
Because I've been to a home and garden store, and I've also been to a Home Depot. And to me, they're two separate things. A home and garden store is more like trying to think. just more of a garden store that, might also have some lamps there, or, things that is more directed towards gardening. We're talking about
Okay.
like a Home Depot, then yeah, I can kind of understand that. And you can
But
actually
yeah,
use Home Depot.
I
You
can?
th there is some confusion on whether or not you can use a registered trademark within your story. You are allowed to do it, but it cannot be in a negative way. You can't just say, "Oh yeah, I went to Home Depot. I remember Home Depot growing up and it sucked. I always hated Home Depot." Don't say that. You can say, "Hey, I found this store over here. It's Home Depot. There's seeds inside." That's fine.
Oh, well, okay then. Then I need to redo that so that it's like a Home Depot instead of just some random home and garden store. Because
Yeah.
that's what I had envisioned in my head is like a Home Depot or a Lowe's where they have all of this stuff that can be used to rebuild society if you ever need to.
I continued on past the chandelier aisle, the toilet aisle. Hmm. Passing the seat aisle, continued on, remove comma, past the chandelier aisle and the toilet aisle. Well, you can't pass the toilet aisle and then stop at the toilet aisle to look at the toilets.
Okay.
So you'll need to
So,
rework this, that she
yeah.
passed the toilet aisle and she passed the chandelier aisle and came to the toilet aisle to where she paused to look at the toilet bowls. So, how is there still water in these toilets? Wouldn't they have evaporated if it's such a dry place?
Um,
I
that's
mean,
a
in all honesty, even if this is a Home Depot, I've never seen a toilet in an aisle that had water in it. And even if there
good
was
point.
water in it, it would have evaporated.
Yeah, this whole paragraph can go bye-bye. Because it doesn't make sense. It in a dry environment, it doesn't make sense for there to be little bitty tiny lakes in the toilet bowls with tiny frogs. I mean, it was a cool visual, but it doesn't make sense with the world building.
Moving on, I drove my little cart forward, past pipes that were made of materials I doubted would ever be made again. Plastic required factories, after all. I did, however, stop and grab two of the smaller metal pipes. Who knew that they'd come in handy? Or
Who
who
knew
knew when
when?
they would come in handy? All right, so past pipes that were made of materials I doubted that would ever be made again. What materials are you talking about?
Plastic?
Like PVC pipes?
Yeah.
Okay. I did, however, stop and grab two smaller metal pipes. Okay, I think this sentence is mostly fine. The cart stalled out, and honestly, I wish it hadn't. I think most people would wish that a cart didn't stall out.
Good
So
point.
you could probably just remove this. I mean, that would be obvious to
Yeah.
anyone. The cracking in the floor was so severe it had created a small riverbed. I say small, but it was roughly the size of me across across if I laid down head to toe. Well, even then, that's not really a point of reference. It is some point of reference because I mean, the smallest that this person can be is probably 4'10", 4'11", and the tallest is 6'5". But it being
Yeah.
female, we could probably say at a maximum is 6 foot. But still, that is a wide gap there between basically 5 foot to 6 foot. It's a whole foot difference. And
Good
using her
point.
as a measuring stick, we kind of get an idea, but it's still a bit vague unless we indicate somewhere else how tall she is. So it's not bad, but just realize that it does kind of lead like, then the person's wondering, well, how tall is she? Has it already been mentioned? Have I missed it somewhere mentioned? So it could break immersion.
Okay.
The water was too dark, too murky for me to see the bottom. I didn't know one way or another what was in it. I didn't know. Yeah, one way or another. Just say, I don't know what was in it, and I didn't intend to find out. The one way or another is just too wordy. So we could just take that all together and still say the exact same thing.
Okay.
Dragging a sheet of plywood over was no simple feat. The wood was heavy and slippery with mold. I mistrusted its ability to hold my weight, but in the end, I didn't have better options. This feels very disjointed here. Lifting it, I felt it fall so that it would span the river. Oh, I let it fall, so I need to stop soon. Lifting it, I let it
Okay.
fall so that it would span the little river, a bridge across the dark, still waters. Remove comma here. Stepping on the wood, my other foot still on terra linoleum. Nice. I listened to the stress
Scream.
wood cream under me.
It's supposed to be scream. Actually, no, it's supposed to be creak.
I would say scream.
Okay.
Scream is a lot more visual. I mean, creak is nice, but scream is just more poetic.
Very true.
It seemed thick enough. It hadn't bent when I moved at all. I'd actually make that one sentence, those last two right there.
Okay.
Okay, so you're talking about a piece of plywood, and you're saying that it was heavy to lift, heavy to carry, heavy to pull. All you're
Yep.
saying is that the wood was heavy. I mean, plywood in itself is not so much that it's heavy, but that it's big. So it's hard to really carry it because it's such a big thing to hold.
I I kind of have to disagree with you just a tiny bit because I personally cannot lift a sheet of plywood because I am tiny.
Okay.
But other than that, you are correct. Most of the problem with moving plywood is that it is big and bulky and difficult to maneuver. Um, but what I was trying to get across there wasn't just that it was big and bulky and difficult to maneuver, but rather that it was heavy too, that it had a little weight to it so that it would hold her weight at least enough to where she could get across.
Just her get across or the shopping cart as well?
Just her.
Now, where's this water coming from?
I honestly did not world build enough to figure that out. As you can tell, I have a problem with not world building enough. Um, but as we were going through this, I came up with an idea, and I thought there's got to be water mains underneath major stores in order for them to get water for their bathrooms and things like that. So I was thinking maybe one of those burst, and that's where the little river is coming from.
Well, the only problem with that, and maybe it's not a problem if this is what you want to say, is the only way for that to be created is if there's water continuously flowing through those pipes, which would mean that the place to where the water would be coming from is still pumping water. I mean, you could say that. I mean, no one's there to control it, so it's automated and it's continuing to work, but that's kind of a
For
thing
how
that you'd
long?
have to set up in this world is that somewhere out there, there's this building that's pumping out water.
Yeah, that doesn't work. Okay, let's go ahead and stop for now, and I will get some of the rewrites done tonight or maybe tomorrow before our next episode. Um,
Yeah, because let me ask you this.
yeah.
Why is this scene so important?
Because it's meant to show that she is taking risks in what she does and that this new world is dangerous in ways that our world isn't. It's meant to show that the world isn't, you know, great. That despite all of the good things in the world, it's still something that you have to be careful of.
Okay, well, that is a fair point. Um, I mean, if you want to have this in here, you need to explain, at least to yourself, where this water is coming from. The readers don't necessarily need to know where it's coming from. I mean, like I said, it could be a water main that's broke, or, maybe there's some river somewhere that, or a dam. Oh, there's a good idea. That there's
Oh
some
yeah.
dam that eventually broke, and, some of the water has collected on the outside of this town, and some of it has leaked into the store and has created this river. But the only problem with that is that she's walking on concrete. So that means that the river would have to be flowing there for quite some time to dig into the concrete to create this river that's too treacherous for her to cross.
Good point. And
So
it wouldn't
depending how long of a time this has been going on.
I estimated about 5 years.
That
I
wouldn't be
think.
enough time.
Yeah, that
Not
wouldn't
for
be
it to
enough
be
time.
treacherous.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna
I
have to
mean,
think on it
all right.
and figure out what's going on. Well, in the meantime, that and my brain just completely died on me.
Well, what are your
Wow.
thoughts so far with my recommendations for editing it?
As usual, you're impeccable and you're coming up with ways to make it so much better than it is. I haven't really disagreed with anything you've said so far. And to be honest, it's all stuff I had considered but just didn't uh, enact because of either laziness or the idea that I didn't need to do that because of reasons and flittering off into the ether. Um, it's pretty much a case of you're it's common sense what the changes that you're suggesting I make. And I think that's what it what the story needs is common sense, because I'm bad at common sense.
Well, to be fair, you were just trying to get a story together. You're just trying to get it finished so it could get published. And as we established, this isn't your best work, and even you know it's not your best work.
Yeah, no.
I mean, your heart wasn't fully into the story when you wrote it. But, you know, we all have our difficulties like this. I mean, when I did Dagar Legacy, I mean, I was very passionate about that. And even then, my editor pointed out a lot of problems with it. It's like, you know, this part doesn't make sense. And even though I thought it did, I'm like, well, you know, if she's saying it, maybe I should take some extra attention to it to try to make sure that it makes sense to what she's talking about.
Yeah.
And there were times where she made a recommendation, and I'm like, no, I disagree with you. I'm going to keep it the way it is. So.
Yeah. And one of those things is, like you said at the beginning, it's going to be a case of either I consider it and then decide to go with it, or consider and then decide not to go with it. Most of these, just straight off the top of my head, I can tell you I'm going to go with them because they do make the story better. They make it flow better, and it just in general sounds better the way that you suggest it. So, I really did like doing this with you, because honestly, it's nice to be able to talk to you one-on-one and actually figure out what's going on, and hear your explanations on everything. And it's really nice to be able to have that one-on-one time kind of thing. So, thank
Yeah,
you
it's actually easier for me
again.
as well, because it's like in the past when I've done it for you, you know, I've just gone through there and made my changes and then gave it to you. And I always felt that there was a little bit of a disconnect there, because it's like, well, now I do try to leave notes. Usually I put sticky notes on it, or the comments that Word has, but even then, that's not good enough to be able to just interact with you one on one. And it's like, okay, here's this, here's this. And I think it's also better because even when I've done editing for you, and then I'd come on Skype and be like, this part doesn't make sense here. I always feel like you kind of take it a little too personally, and you kind of like are down on yourself, where it's like, oh yeah, you're right, that doesn't make sense. Oh no, blah 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 blah. And here I can give you instant reassurance that no, it's fine. You know, these kind of things happen. Don't fret about it. We're
And
writers.
that is
We're not good at editing.
yeah, and that is incredibly helpful, actually, because I thrive off of that kind of feedback, and I really do appreciate it. Um, so yeah, it's nice.
But
Plus, it's nice to just be able to see your face.
but I will invite anyone who managed to stay with us and watch this thing. If you have any comments or suggestions for Nicohle, because this is all about her. I'm sure you could say, oh, well, you're an asshole, Chris, so, you know, you shouldn't be writing at all. This isn't about me. This is about Nicohle. So if you're going to call anyone an asshole, call me an asshole. But, you know, if you have any comments, suggestions, or maybe alternate advice, Nicole's going to welcome it, you know. So
Oh, absolutely.
she's going to read through it, and even if she doesn't reply to you, she's going to think about what you said. So I definitely encourage you. If you think I'm wrong on something, feel free to say something, because I'm not claiming to be perfect here. I'm not claiming to know all of the answers. I just ask a lot of tough questions. If you think, well, no, this is how you could say that there was water in the air, or there was water damage, or here's how there's a river in the middle of Home Depot. Go for it. Because maybe you'll think of something I haven't thought of. So definitely post down below any of your thoughts, comments, suggestions, criticisms, gripes, complaints, uh, soliloquies.
Soliloquies are especially welcomed simply due to the fact that I would like to see if you can get to the character limit on a comment. That would be fun.
On YouTube, that does it have comment limit?
I don't know, which is why I say it would be fun. But all right, thank you very much for joining us. Chris and I will be back with another episode tomorrow. After that, we have no idea when the next one will be, but we'll figure it out and let you guys know. Thank you very much for joining us, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I think we're going to go ahead and get going.
Yes, everyone have a very good day.